UN Security Council? Are we going to see discrimination?
Well, I assume that there will be some harsh criticism from a number of nations. But as the previous speaker mentioned, this convention is essentially a non-event. I went out this morning to buy a New York Times, which is considered to be the most informative paper in the United States, and scoured it for any mention at all on this chemical weapons convention in The Hague, something I consider extremely important, not only because of its significance in terms of weaponry and the lethality of these weapons, but because Americans need to know that their country is refusing to abandon its stockpile. There was not a word in the New York Times on this convention. That makes it a non-event. That makes it an event that goes down the memory hole for the overwhelming majority of reading Americans. To me, that is mind-boggling, and it says something very, very much. It speaks a lot to the amount of censorship that our media has in this country. We claim to be such a free and open society, and with freedom of speech and freedom of the press, and yet the press here is extremely servile to the interests that shape our government policies, and as a result, the #1 newspaper in the United States didn't print a word about this convention.
Well, let's put this
I think that's a real crime.
Yeah, I'd like to put this question to Gordon Duff now as well. Now, Gordon is speaking about what's being called the media blackout on this. Now, we know, for instance, that while the United States is not complying with this convention, it was also back earlier on, maybe a few months back, it had promised to reduce its nuclear weapons, but then President Obama announced that those weapons are going to be made smaller and more effective, and he said that it's going to be done with tens of billions of dollars to be invested in it. At the same time, President Obama is getting the Nobel Peace Prize. There is a lot of questions on hypocrisy, isn't there, about how the United States is dealing with this issue of non-conventional weapons and the media helping in the process.
Well,
and I would love to give this another answer when I have a chance.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Gordon.
In its weapon, there are a couple of issues the U.S. looks at in its weapon stockpiles. The idea of biological and chemical warfare, of course, is that we call it more bang for the buck. They're very inexpensive to produce, but they're also extremely deniable. You have a couple of ways of being able to deny use, of course, and that's by controlling the areas where they're released and, as Jennifer pointed out, controlling the press. So you can use, for instance, much of the experimentation and development in biological weapons have been in for the destruction of crops, which has two edges. One is to of course, put nations under financial pressure, but secondly, financial goals for manipulating markets. On the nuclear side, we've been on the other side of the mirror since 1990. Peter, I know, is a specialist in nuclear proliferation, but we have people who have worked at Livermore Labs who told us that the U.S. had developed a fusion capability, meaning that it could build low radiation, extremely small nuclear weapons inexpensively. And the reports that we had from Chris Busby here over the last few weeks have indicated that not only was depleted uranium being found in, especially around Fallujah, but that fully undepleted, 95% weapons grade uranium-235 had been used, indicating the use of some sort of weapon, meaning that active nuclear explosions had occurred in both Afghanistan and Iraq at some time in the last few years. And that new developments, they're talking about $10 billion. We had started to throw hundreds of billions of dollars into these projects of black budget beginning in the 1980s. Much of the money that went into the SDI space initiative had gone into the development of nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare weapons and black sites that are utterly unreportable. What the U.S. claims it has, or what people even believe that we have, is so far from the truth that what the press likes to talk about is between 1 and 2 generations behind the reality of the science, be it biological, chemical, or the physics of the weapons we have available. And deniability has been the protection. All the United States has ever had to do is just say, we didn't do it, it didn't happen. And the press never asks a question. This is where Jennifer's totally right. There is no investigative press. There is full deniability about anything. So the U.S. has been willing to see these weapons tested and used where no one else would ever think of it.
Right, and now let's just get back to the issue of the using of these weapons. I'll come back to you, Jennifer, but let's just go to Birmingham now. And I'd like to put this question to Peter. Now, the main criticism, Peter, as Gordon was saying, the use of these weapons, depleted uranium in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even these weapons being sold, for instance, to Israel. Did anyone pressure Israel for using cluster bombs, killing thousands in Lebanon? Has anyone been punished for the effects that depleted uranium has had and will have for years in Fallujah in Iraq? The question is, who is responsible, who punishes who, and who respects these conventions?
Well, I have to emphasize, first of all, that the use of the current weaponry in all the areas of conflict, starting from the Balkans to Kuwait, Iraq, Afghanistan, North Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Gaza, Lebanon, you know, where do you draw the line? You've got to understand that all the weapons they're using are in gross violation of the Geneva Convention, in at least 4 cases, just on depleted uranium alone. And as Mr. Duff pointed out, tactical nuclear weapons were used, at least 1 in Iraq, and several were used in Afghanistan in the Tora Bora Mountains, which actually created an earthquake at the time. And you've got to look at the history. Who's responsible? Well, in America, the ultimate commander-in-chief is the president. He has to give the final signatory to all weapons that are used. But historically, a lot of the chemical and biological warfare started off in Rhodesia. And when the regime went from white to black, Maggie Thatcher panicked and decided to move the whole shebangle and the staff all the way down to South Africa, where that research and development was continued. They even developed a black-only bomb that targeted the Afro gene. And there's even talk now there may be one for the Chinese gene. You know, this is absolutely insane. We've got weapons going missing, nuclear weapons going missing, our own Prime Minister involved, George Bush, Dick Cheney, you know, to name but a few. These are war crimes.
Right, and let's go to Jennifer now.
Obama, of course, Obama.
We're running out of time. I'd like to give the last few minutes to Jennifer. If you could also, Jennifer, tell us in less than 2 minutes. The US is calling a lot of these weapons, for instance, cluster munitions, etc., as a military necessity for the United States. Tell us what you think about that.
A military necessity, perhaps if one wants to look at the U.S. economy, which is primarily based on the aerospace industry and the military industry. Certainly we are benefiting economically. It's probably the only place in the United States that continues to benefit economically from the sale of these lethal and illegal weapons to countries like Israel, who, in my opinion, will use these chemical weapons, will actually test them out on the populations of the people when they carry out their attacks. I think there's no question that white phosphorus, that Mark 77, a new name for a new version of napalm, cluster bombs, depleted uranium, all of these weapons and new ones called DIMEs, dense inert material explosives that use a chemical called tungsten. These were all used on the civilian populations of Gaza and prior to that in Lebanon. Now, the horror of that alone doesn't seem to be reaching the American public, and that's what I think is scary, because it's the public here that will be able to pressure the government for it to stop. That to me is the only way this will change, is by complete mobilized mass public opposition.
Okay,
could I add
just stop you there, because unfortunately we've run out of time. A big thank you there to Jennifer Lowenstein, Associate Director of the Middle East Studies Program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, joining us there live from Washington. Thank you very much to Peter Eyre in Birmingham, Middle East Consultant. And a big thank you as well to Senior Editor of Veterans Today, Mr. Gordon Duff, joining us on the line from Ohio, from the United States. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm afraid we've run out of time. From me, Homa Lezgi, and the rest of the team here in Tehran. Until our next program, it's goodbye.